And I see we have it recording. Do we have transcription? Does somebody own this? They can add the. Hona, I think you're the owner of this. Do you have the Gemini?
Well, probably traveling, I think.
Yeah, Jonas might be traveling at this moment. We can try to. Any administrator should be able to just inject the AI transcriptor.
It is being recorded though. The top left red dot.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm also encouraging anyone who have some other agenda and puts in the today's topics. October 1st, we have 2 topics right now. First, the reader restriction in the load table response. Secondly, is support for all of the challenges in the Iceberg REST.
Hi there, everyone. So this is my first time to join. So I didn't have the access, or I haven't checked the agenda, but just wondering if there'll be some Q&A type or some open session time. I just come with some question. I think it's not in the agenda that Yufei just mentioned.
I think we can have some Q&A time if we can even give a new people a few minutes in the beginning if we don't mind. Everybody is okay with that, and we can talk about Q&A, or we just put in the after all these 2 topics. Usually these 2 topics sometimes it will extend a little bit, but since we only have 2, I think we're gonna have a little bit time. But yeah, definitely welcome to the Community Sync.
Yeah, I can put my topic at the end.
You can also type your question in the messages. We can add this topic into our agenda. I've already posted a link to the doc about this meeting.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah, I will add. Thank you.
Thank you. So since Jonas is on traveling, I'm gonna try to host this meeting. Thanks everyone for joining this meeting. So today we're gonna have we are having 2 topics and 1 Q&A time. The first topic is the read restriction in the load table response. I was wondering who is owner for adding this.
I added it, Yufei. So yeah, I can elaborate on that. So last thing we discussed briefly about having schema evolution cases, particularly renames and drops, to be handled as part of this response that we are sending. And this would require that we have bounded references and bounded expressions sent back. Now, the problem with the bounded references is that it has an accessor method that is a very Java specific library that gets tied to a bounded reference. But all we actually care is about the field IDs. If we have a field ID, and considering how we bind things at the client end from the schema, we already have a way to create a bounded reference from that. So as the course of that, I have introduced a couple of terms. One term is resolved reference is what we call. Thank you, Stephen, for naming that. I was having a very hard time to come up with a name for that. Essentially, what it contains is the field ID along with the name. And if you have that, you can use to bind, or you can get a term which is of an unbounded, which is an unbounded term, abstracted, and then you can from that create a bounded term. So, and similarly, since it's a term, it goes for the transforms which reference to the term, and as well as the expression which references transforms and terms directly, to have such kind of references as part of their survey. So whenever we have a bounded expressions, whenever we are serializing and sending it back to the JSON, we'll just make sure that the resolved representation is being used. And when we are reserializing it back and want to create a bounded expression out of it, we will use the bind expressions and the responding APIs to bind it to the current schema that is an input to the term and go from there. So that's entirely the POC. I put out a POC PR. Thank you so much, Amog, also for taking a look into this. So just wanted to share this with the community and get some feedbacks if there is on what do they think, and just put it in the ears that, okay, this is something that we'll really appreciate you taking a look into that.
So thanks for working on this. Is now a good time to talk about the resolved reference versus bound reference, or do you want to just take care of that on PR reviews?
Both works for me. Whatever you recommend. Yeah.
I'm just curious why we needed an extra ref, because like wouldn't bound reference work since we're referring to these things by ID?
So bound reference had an accessor class, which is returning the Java class according to that. And if we try to serialize that value in our serialized survey, that would be hard to model. That's why you have to come up with a different reference rather than the bounded reference for this front.
Oh, okay. So this is because we can't directly deserialize to a reference there.
Exactly.
Okay, so it makes sense to me. I'll take a look at the PR for further questions. But thank you. I didn't quite catch that the first time around.
Cool.
Appreciate it.
Sure.
All right.
I mean, I just wanted to get clarity. I mean, it's basically a follow-up on my thread, because like we also discussed the schema evolution in the original doc. And I mean, that's, I think where I'm like a bit frustrated, because like we have like two separate discussions, and some of the discussions happen like in the doc, and like and now we are rehashing it. So first, like when I hear your explanation, I'm not sure why like the API should care about so much about the implementation. Like if the expression, I mean, like returned by the API, reference the current schema, and like the load schema, or the IDs. Like, why do we need to add something basically to make the expression evaluation code works better? Like, shouldn't be like the opposite. Like, shouldn't be like try to adapt the expression evaluation code to match that? But like also like, how can we like also like have like, when you have like this type of discussions which happens, like can we find a way to get like one place? And like I just want to get clarity on that. Just because like we mentioned schema evolution in the original proposal doc.
I just wanted to answer on the API part of the things, because we're talking of survey, and because the load table part of the API does not knows the schema that you're binding to, and catalog doing the binding for us and returning the resolved reference is not something we can do, because the way it's modeled in the IRC spec at this point of time, they are named reference. They're not field references at this point of time. So that's the structure that we need to define. So that's why we are talking about what we need to do as part of the survey and everything else. Going back to, I mean, I'll leave on the what happened to the thread, because I have already added my explanation on what actually happened to the other people on why there was a separate discussion or anything created to the other community members on this front.
I think it's kind of important to, hopefully not make assertions like the original doc or things like that. I mean, on that thread, I think it was, correctly called out that the proposal that Prashant's, PR is implementing has been something we've been talking about for quite some time. So I'm not sure that I would agree that, the original doc had schema evolution covered. There certainly was a doc, and it's great to see, more people interested in contributing in this area and thinking about these problems. So like it's great to work together on this. But yeah, I wouldn't be too concerned about, who did what when. Like let's work on the existing PR and try and build consensus.
So I just want to add on top of that, for like anybody who hasn't seen the email, like there's actually been, a long standing discussion about like FCAC and different proposals for trying to address that, going all the way back to some early versions that were, just like SQL overrides for table load, to proposals of using dynamic views, to static views, to policy exchange, to access decisions. So it's actually been a long discussion. And there are lots of different artifacts out there, both documents, potentially some PRs and things like that. So I think what we want to focus on is not process for what is the process of doing this. It's more about how do we arrive at some sort of consensus and path forward. So I think that's largely what Ryan is saying. Like we've got a number of different things out there right now. So how do we bring this together and come to something that we generally agree on as a path forward?
Okay, I mean, I have no problem. Like, I'm aligned on the whole goal. Like, I want like what's best for the project. But can we also recognize that, like, when we had the original meeting, like Ryan, you asked for the spec, we came up with a document, and like if it was not, I mean, we followed your advice, and like if it was not things, or if say like we move to PR, which is fine by me, but like I don't think in that many discussions, like we said at some point, hey, like let's move the conversation from the doc to the PR. The doc came before, and for me that's the confusing part. Is like at some point, like I mean, you just commented on the PR, and like and some people were still on the doc. So I think like if I can ask like the PMC group, like in general, like to help like guiding people a bit more clearly, or like and like saying like, hey, you know what, like we need. I mean, it's just because like we invested time, and I mean, maybe I'm not the one who invested most time, but like I have also like other people I know who invested a lot of time in that, and that's that was not very inclusive, like to to not be clear, like very
So
I'm just trying to be also like to think about like the impact when like we're lacking clarity and like the impact you can have on people trying to contribute to the community.
yeah, we definitely want to set clear expectations, and it's been a something that we've done for a long time to say that we are our tactic is not to assign things or say that you have exclusive right to work on a project. So we don't assign issues. We see multiple docs written for features over time, things like how many times have relative paths been worked on and not quite gotten there. Then another proposal comes up later. Similarly, like I said, we don't assign issues because Generally, it happens that people will try to work on an issue and then not open a PR. And so it's okay to have parallel efforts. We do want to coordinate those parallel efforts, but I think it's always okay to have parallel efforts. And I think that, in this case, from my perspective, what has happened was that this idea and, basic solution was out there for a really long time. And the PR is the piece or the part of the work that is furthest along. And so I think that's why it's naturally getting a little bit more attention than the doc. I think the doc is, great to have, but I don't necessarily think that it is, something that needs to be the center of attention, I guess. Does that make sense?
I mean, what I was asking was really coordination and and just clarity, because sometimes doc is the center of attention, sometimes it's not. And I mean, I'm not interested in so much about the reason, but just help us. You are part of so many decisions. People basically follow your lead. So all I'm asking is that a slightly better help on the coordination. So
I guess in this case, the difference is a lot of these ideas were out there and well understood and well known. And so I think that the next step was actually working on spec changes. And I think that that's a good thing again to do in parallel. The doc, proposing something that, I don't think was really in line with what we were already thinking. And then, it wasn't quite getting updated as quickly as we thought it might. So I think it's pretty reasonable for the parallel effort to be there and draw some attention. Not that we shouldn't, work on the doc as well. We can certainly, have that updated as something and a good artifact for the community for how we think about FGAC.
At this point, I guess the question is we have the PR, we have the doc. Do we consider those significantly out of alignment with each other? Are they really competingly different proposals?
There are small misalignment. I think the doc is still referencing a separate endpoint. We remove. I mean, there was removal. It's fully expression based. The doc mentioned maybe it's more extensible, and that's the type of comments we need to port back to the PR or the spec change. If that's the source of truth now. For example, about evolution, if you need to have at some point expression v2 or things and stuff, because right now, I believe that it's it's just basically a field, and it's not doesn't really say the type, or if that's at some point let's say we introduce a new expression language for Iceberg, to address some or to want to extend. So maybe minor things like that, but it's not very far off.
Steven?
Yeah, I think to answer Daniel's question, I think the V1 version of that doc, I think is quite different. The V1 version is focused on SQL string and also separate payload. I think a few days ago the doc was updated with V2 version, which is changing to the Iceberg expression. So that part is kind of aligned, but on the response, I haven't. Yeah,
it was a couple of weeks ago, just to. And I think there's a few comments also on the doc, which was done on the V2, but we need to move also to the PR just to make sure people are fully coordinated.
Sure.
Yeah, just wanted to say that one more thing on that front itself, that I think in the mailing thread when I bumped this, it was told that this proposal will not change as it is. And a UDF dependency additionally. Like UDF was a plan forward. I know going into the history of things, but I am still thinking that the way we were thinking that the feedback was given versus what was iterated upon and was done was not the thing that which we are telling right now, in my opinion. But again, this is my personal take on these things. Hence, based on what the understanding of mine, because I think the load table itself was being told, I thought we agreed upon the load table part as well. And then hence, since I didn't saw that happening and there was a very fair bit of consensus on that front, that's where
I mean,
diverged.
sure. I mean, you made your arguments. Like, I don't want sure. Like, just want to remind people also that like not everybody can move like OSS things. I was like also like summertime, like people take time off. So some proposal like move slower, some proposal faster.
I
don't know, like that's not the conversation. What I'm just moving forward. Like, I mean, you don't have to justify yourself. Like, I don't care.
Fair enough. I think then, you know, the question is, do we have two proposals, which I think, you know, this started out significantly different and we're kind of representing two directions, or do we have one? You know, I think we should look at the differences between the two and try and figure out a path forward with, you know, a single design and, you know, consensus. So it sounds like the remaining issue is whether to have a separate endpoint or whether to have these structures sent back at load table time. So let's focus on that decision, and also, you know, continue reviewing and working with the pieces that we know are going to be required, things like the expression serialization updates that Prashant is working on. So in you know, with that in mind, let's move forward by saying, you know, what are the arguments for or against the load table approach? You know, do we have consensus on that? It's just not updated in the doc, or is there a serious misalignment where we don't agree on whether it's going to be you know, providing these things at load table time, or whether you have to come and grab them from a separate endpoint?
I guess I can start. I don't think that's a big difference. I think like it probably simplifies a bit on like having the data. I mean the processing instructions inside the load table in terms of schema synchronization, because like there's an assumption at that time that the catalog, like what the catalog returns as the instructions, for the restrictions or the filtering of the rows, is basically matching the current schema. Well, like if you're doing like a separate call, like there's always this issue of like has the table schema change in between the moment I did my load table and then I'm trying to get my instructions. The on the other side of things, like the issue is about like security. Do we want to send the processing instructions even? I mean, is there like a risk of leaking things in sending the processing instruction too soon? I don't know. I guess like also like having a separate endpoints allow you, like if you ask for specific like time travel, I think that was also like some of the consideration. If you need to get the processing instruction for like an older schema in case you need to do time travel or trying to get like an older snapshot, if you're doing during the load table, you don't get that capability. So maybe we need both, or like I don't know.
Can you be more specific about that? Are you saying that
let's say, for example, you are trying to read from like a specific tag, like instead of getting like the latest thing, but like the was like an older version of the schema, and like you want to be able to tell the catalog, hey, it's not like the latest version I'm trying to read, it's like a different version. And like, can you adjust the restrictions to what I'm currently reading?
I guess my question there is, can we have a version of policy or the policy decision that we're sending back that works for all versions of the schema or all refs? So, for example, like if you have a column that would a mask restriction on a column that was added after that tag, I think it's safe to just say, hey, this doesn't show up, and therefore we don't need to mask it. I think that the other side would be the row restrictions, where you have a row that is involved, a column that's involved in a filter statement that must be applied. And in that case, the answer is that if you cannot project that row because it didn't exist in that version, then you probably fail the scan because you cannot satisfy that restriction. So like, I don't know that we necessarily need to coordinate the schema that's being read. I mean, this is definitely a good thing to point out and think through the cases of, but I'm not sure that we actually need to do that. And even if we did, that would require the service to either dynamically change the restrictions it sends back to say like, oh, drop this column restriction based on an input schema, which I'm not all that comfortable with. Or it would require, being able to time travel the read restrictions, and time traveling the current, fine-grained access control policy on a table does not seem like that actually seems like a big security hole to me, where if I'm the user and I say, oh, I just realized that this column sometimes contains social security numbers, I need to mask it for all users. I actually want to mask it for all time. I don't want people to be able to time travel to before I masked it. So I are actually like current policy for a given table object.
But today we use names, right? We are not using IDs.
So no, we are talking about IDs. So, right, this would live through column renames and things like that. And so, like, I think that it makes the most sense to say that we can send back a representation of the current read restrictions that must be applied. We probably do want to define some rules for, like, if you're reading a version of the schema that does not have a particular column, and you have to apply a row filter based on that column, then you can't return any rows. Similarly, like, you can ignore, if a column doesn't exist and you need to apply a masking policy, not projecting that column at all satisfies the masking policy.
Okay. I come with more research. Like I'll put that on. I'll collaborate on the mailing list, on things, just to make sure like I capture what we just said, and like if I think of other cases, I will keep posting, I guess.
Sounds good. And I think, Prashant, we probably also want to note these cases and make sure that the PR aligns with whatever we discuss on the mailing list.
Sounds good. Prashant, you wanna
Yeah,
wrap up a little bit?
Yeah. Sorry. Just to complete on that, from the security point of view, we are already returning credential as part of the load table anyway. So, the endpoint needs to be secured in a way that whenever I'm loading the table, I already have scoping of the credentials, which are considered to have a trust relationship with everyone. So that security point of view is implicitly applied to the load table itself. The second aspect of this is like just like to reiterate on the proposal that we are talking about field IDs which are immutable, and the idea is that whenever you attach a policy to an entity in the catalog, based on the schema of that entity, you capture the field ID, and then forward catalog just stores the field ID and not takes the resolution of field ID to the corresponding name per the schema requested, rather than just storing the field ID and that's just returning it back as part of the load table. So less processing on the catalog side, or less dependency on the catalog side to resolve the corresponding projection or deal with the column projection in the catalog side, is a one additional benefit if we just rely on field IDs for which we have masking policies defined in the state when it was attached. So that's an additional benefit in case of load table as a for argument for reusing the load table API and sending it back as the field IDs. So yeah, that's an additional things that I wanted to share. But definitely, I mean, for the time travel and other projection use cases, I'll document that in my PR also. Yeah.
Looks like we have consensus, some action items to do. Thanks everyone for discussing, and let's move to the next one.
Can I quickly just ask something else related to that proposal?
Sure, yeah.
Is it too soon to start proposing an extension to the expression syntax for coding a UDF?
For what?
For invoking a UDF?
No, I don't think so. These are things that we definitely want to get started looking at. So that'd be a great extension too.
Okay.
I do think it's worth, like, especially on the UDF front, making sure you reach out to like a Ajanta who has been working on some of the UDF stuff, and make sure that like we are collaborating.
Well, you would want that in the UDF discussion, not like as a separate conversation.
So I think actually this sort of has a nice separation where basically the expression language would need some sort of apply a named function, and then the UDF work allows us to resolve those named functions. So the UDF work is probably separate, but the expression that we need in the Iceberg expressions is apply named function.
So everybody agrees, like, separate proposal? Then
So proposal or
like separate, I mean, I know, like PR or spec change or like.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I think it would be exactly like, how do we represent this? What are the capabilities that we need in the expression serialization and syntax? I think that's a great thing to look into.
Okay.
Sounds great. Thanks. Let's move on to the next one, the support for of challenging Iceberg REST. I believe this is Alex item.
Yeah, so hey everyone, I brought this small topic to the agenda today, and sorry it's a bit of a short notice. I sent the email this morning, so you probably didn't see it. But the situation is that today, if the server replies with 401, so unauthorized, currently the REST client just surfaces the error to the caller. So basically it materializes as a not authorized exception. But there is always a challenge in that response. And depending on the auth scheme, it may be feasible to actually retry the request with a different authentication. For example, in OAuth, even if you have token refreshes and everything, you still can have the situation where the client sends a token that is perfectly valid at that moment, and then all of a sudden it gets revoked. And so when the server tries to introspect the token, it's not valid anymore. And in this situation, it's actually very simple to recover. You just need a new token. And so it's a bit like disappointing to have to fail that request just because of that. And so the proposal I have is to add support for that in the Auth Manager API. And basically for OAuth, the implementation would be very simple. It's just about refetching a new token. And you probably do that for like 1 or 2 retries, and then you fail if it keeps failing. What do you think about something like this?
So I guess my question is kind of like, are we seeing this in practice, or is this kind of like hypothetically, like we could, so we actually have you, like, it helps
Yes, it's very rare.
like-
It's very rare. But if you force the situation, obviously I tried by revoking tokens. But yes, if you revoke tokens, you definitely are exposed to this situation.
But is this like a really rare case where, hey, the revocation is happening because, like, you know, there's
Compromised tokens. Yeah, it's generally the reason why you all of a sudden revoke all of the tokens on a server and forces all the clients to re-authenticate.
all of the tokens. So like this, you're like revoking a signing key or something like that was used to mint a bunch of tokens that are like in flight.
Could be that. You can also, for example, if you know that a user has been compromised, you can revoke all the tokens pertaining to that user and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't have any problem with it as long as it's not like significant change. If it's as easy as just saying
It's not. I don't think it is. Yeah. So, but I just wanted to have a little, consensus before going forward because, as you pointed out, it's rare. It doesn't happen all the time, of course. Yeah.
I guess this is really just a matter of, sending back this header that says, here's how to authenticate, right? What is how is that different than how the client is already configured to authenticate? I think that's why this was overlooked, because, you configure the client to authenticate and then like you send back a 401 and it should just retry with its normal authentication mechanism if it can, right? So I guess I understand that this is a thing that services can do, and it seems totally fine if a server were to send these headers. I don't see like the reason to drive client behavior based on it, though.
I mean, is it part of the OAuth protocol though? Like, I mean, this is a standard like header to challenge the client and have it re-authenticate. So I'm not like, if it's a standard practice, I'm not too concerned about that. The only things that just like jump to mind, again, I haven't had much time to think about it, is one of the challenges that we've had with some of the like going and refreshing tokens is it the same like scope and reflection of like what they had at the time that they were invoking that call? Because like you can make a call to do an operation like commit table or create table, and if you then have to go and get a new token and it was somehow in a different context or scope than what you used with the initial request, you get into a weird state where you're like...
It would be bound to the scope of the auth session. So this situation would be solved. Each auth session processes its own challenges. That's the idea. And back to Ryan's, go ahead.
Like if you got something as part of an exchange or something like that, you can't necessarily get back to that same state by just going back to the IDP, right?
It depends on the auth scheme. Yeah. In auth, you can. If you can refetch a new token, you can recover. If you are using basic auth, you cannot recover because basically it's hard coded. So yeah, but again, it depends on the manager. For OAuth, it has a small chance of succeeding if you retry the request with a new token. So why not? That was the idea.
So I don't know. There are a couple cases like the Trino case where we do like impersonation with tokens, and a couple of these others. Like I think we just need to look through. Like I'm not saying, hey, this can't be done. They're like the edge cases where you may end up with a token that's of a different scope or doesn't represent the original token. We just have to be careful of that. Is all I'm saying.
Okay.
Dimitri?
Just to reply to Ryan before, so the Apache client has all these mechanisms in place to retry challenges automatically, but since the beginning, we've been avoiding using those low-level mechanisms because we wanted to keep it at the application level. And it was like that even before the Auth Manager, by the way. We never used the Apache client's own way of dealing with challenges, which is basically by providing credential providers to the client. So we've always been doing this at application level. The only thing that is missing is that when we get this 401 response, there are some headers in there that basically say, hey, you did something wrong, but here's how to do it right. And we are not processing those.
So
I don't know who's next.
I think I'm green. What client behavior changes based on these headers, I guess, is my main question. Is the service going to say, hey, go re-authenticate with OAuth? Or is, like looking into this.
Or bearer token. Yeah, again, it
deep,
depends on the, okay, sorry, go ahead.
I didn't do a very deep look, but my main question is, are we, and it's totally fine to send these headers. This is like a server could send these headers and do something. I'm just wondering, if we put these headers into the protocol, what does a client do differently other than, retry on a 401 or re-authenticate on a 401, however that happened? Do these headers specifically say, oh, well, if you were using OAuth, here's a basic www authenticate response, and so you can't go and retry your OAuth? So are we basically saying like, well, this is a way of actually breaking client? I just don't know what you would do on the client side other than retry for 401, and therefore, like, I don't know what the utility of this is other than, filling out our adherence to a spec, which could be the answer. I just am curious what the client does differently.
Let's see how. So let's think about bearer token authentication first. Indeed, in this case, the only thing you can do is retry with a different token. If you try with the same token, you get the same error. But there are other protocols like Kerberos that need these headers to keep going forward in the authentication process, because the authentication process is not just one request response, it's actually several request response cycles. And so the header is actually essential to those protocols. And the reason why I think it was overlooked so far, it's because we have token refreshes. And so it never happens, almost never happens. But I think it's still a good idea to handle those.
So
I don't know if I'm answering to your question in full, but yeah.
No, I think that does help,
Yeah.
right? Because I was looking at, I saw that the possible responses are bearer or
Digest and
basic,
negotiate.
and
Yeah.
it was like, okay, well, what does the client actually do differently? If this is clarifying, like, hey, you're using the wrong Kerberos ticket, or like you need to refresh at this point in your authentication chain. Okay, that makes sense. And I guess, are we saying that this, we're okay with this protocol being behind basically any authentication scheme, and this is necessary for some schemes that may not be popular or may not be, out in the wild, but will eventually be, in theory, supported?
That is correct. And indeed, I don't think we could provide an auth manager for Kerberos, for example, without support for those challenges. It would be impossible. Yeah.
Okay. Again, like I don't oppose having this. I don't know that we really need to add it to the spec, given that today all clients would, basically not do anything differently. But it seems very reasonable to say, like, hey, you should, 401s can have this header and clients can respect it.
I mean, there are a number of things that are just like standard HTTP that we don't like call out specifically in the spec, and like we've purposely like started removing and tried to avoid having language around auth. So I think it's more of a question of just like client behavior. What do we want to introduce in the reference implementation? All of the other implementations, of course, have their own mechanisms for doing this that are different than the Java reference implementation. So I think having something reasonable in the reference implementation is probably good, but I don't know that we need to get to the level of speccing it out. Like if it's part of Kerberos, just point to Kerberos. Like if it's part of, like, other projects may have different ways of dealing with this that may be different. So, I mean, like the libraries, the language-based implementations. But this, like, the issue primarily came up with OAuth, right? So this would be kind of
Absolutely.
like either kicking. I mean, there are some scenarios where like I'm not sure that I fully understand how this would work. Like if it's like a U to M flow, like I can't imagine that actually working in the context of the execution of like a query or something like that, where like, hey, you need to go click this box or something in order to re-authenticate. Like that's not going to happen. If it was like a client credential flow fallback or an M2M flow of some sort, like I could see that being orchestrated automatically. But there are probably going to be some scenarios where it just like doesn't even make sense.
So like I could see this during the impersonation flow. So like the Trino system, the Trino cluster has a long-lived token to identify it. It gets credentials, scoped to a user and scoped in time. That user credential expires. Again, like I
That
don't
one's a
know
different
what
one
to
though,
do.
because that's using token exchange, and that's where I think that there are some open questions. Like, would that fit cleanly into this model? Because that's a different mechanism, and it's actually in the Trino project. How that's
Exactly. It's also like you get an authenticate header that says you need a new bearer token. And so there's really no difference between that and just a 401 unauthenticated. Like you can guess which token or what's wrong with your token either way, right? Unless there's more information there that would allow you to say, oh, it looks like, I guess, yeah, you'd go back to your Trino cluster token and say, is this expired or is this still valid? And then do your token exchange again. So I don't know in the OAuth case what would happen differently in the client, I guess. But it is good to say like, hey, we need to recover from 401s.
Yeah, I agree. And indeed, I'm trying to recall what Trino does. I think it injects a user token in the session context, right? There is a special constructor that was made just for Trino. It is true that if the auth manager retries the 401, maybe Trino won't be super happy because it would prefer to retry the 401 at that level. I think we should go forward and implement this, but have the opinion of a Trino developer here.
What does the implementation? What changes in the implementation? I guess
It's my idea would be to add a new method to the auth session interface. Basically, call it process challenge or something like that, and call it from within the HTTP client.
Okay, so that would basically bubble up the like, hey, go re-authenticate, and then it would come back down. That seems reasonable to me.
And now that I'm thinking about it, in the Trino case, I think they passed the user token to the auth manager, and since it's just a token, you cannot re-authenticate. So it's probable that for the Trino case, it won't change anything.
We could also have a callback to like back into Trino so that they could re-authenticate and then push it back down. Although I thought that I thought that what we were doing in Trino was passing two things: the Trino cluster identity and the user identity, and then using the token exchange flow within the catalog or within the auth manager to do that exchange. So I think we might be able to redo that exchange because that's a catalog thing. In either case, like I think it's probably more about this callback to re-authenticate and then retry that auth failure than it is the header itself, right? So I kind of agree with Dan saying like, the existence or respecting this header is sort of implicit, right? That's part of HTTP authentication.
All right, I think we have a very nice discussion. No spec change for this one, but we probably need some client change. Thanks, everyone. That's the last topics we have today. If there's if there are any questions or other topics we want to talk about today, we have 8 minutes left. Christian?
Yeah, so I have a question, and I missed the discussion. I think it was in August when we had this already in the sync regarding the item potency key PR that is, I think, currently up for votes. I noticed that, look, in that proposal, and I think that makes sense for most endpoints, when the item potency key actually hits. So if it's valid, if it was processed before, we return the exact same response that we returned before. Now, for some endpoints, for example, update table, these can be very large. And I am unsure if the information that is actually in that response, namely the table metadata at this past point in time, is actually valuable for the client. Are we sure that we want to do this?
Well, so Christian, I think the objective would be that, like, if you have like these intermittent failures for like, hey, there was some like load balancer issue, you got a 500, you reattempt, like that request operates as if it had succeeded effectively. So I'm getting that response back. I would almost assume that these aren't intended for long-lived things where like, hey, that response would likely change or significantly change. That is a good question on the load table about like, hey, if other commits have gotten in, like how do I retrieve the exact response body? Like how do I return exactly to the client what it would have committed or did commit at the time? That's a good question.
You don't actually have the ability to do that, because if properties changed after the commit that you're saying was, you just don't have access to the older properties. Nor do I think this is a great case for introducing version properties to handle.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I mean, what a developer could do in these rare cases is maybe load it from S3 or something like that. I mean, the past version, but eventually we want to get rid of that as well. So that's what I came up. Currently, we have this wording in there that the exact same response needs to be produced, and I think.
Yeah, that I'm not sure. Like, maybe that's a wording thing that we can address, but I'm not sure what problem it would be if like a client committed, you recognize that they already committed, and you return the latest table state.
Yes, I agree.
I mean, there may be a scenario. I think that mostly we don't assume that like when I get the latest table version back that like everything is exactly as I submitted it and I ignore whatever came back, right? You reload from whatever was returned. But I don't, off the top of my head, I don't know if there are any places where that causes problems, because currently you would probably not have something that rewrites, though I think that there are a couple cases where like the server may rewrite commits or something like that and hand back a new table state. So we might just say like the current table state.
Okay, so that being said, currently we have copied the text, I think, from, like, this is not our standard. It's an HTTP standard, and that HTTP standard says it like that. So that means that we implemented them slightly differently, but I think if we highlight that in the REST spec, it should be fine.
It is also not a standard, apparently, and the RFC has expired. I just Edward or something. So I think it's a common pattern. Like there are a lot of references in the RFC to existing implementations that differ slightly from what the proposal is, but they're using that as justification that like, hey, this is a standard pattern that, you know. So I don't think it's too problematic if we drift from it. It is not finalized.
Okay, no, then it's all good. Then we should just change the wording and continue the discussion there.
Make sure to add that to the PR if you haven't commented directly on it yet.
Yeah, I have in the first 20 minutes of this meeting. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I think that will probably succeed, but let's definitely make sure that the wording gets updated. Yeah. I think it's a really nice way to, you know, recover from transient failures.
It is, yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, just on touching on that, so I was like, if the update table returns not the response which it would have returned if the request was passed through, so it may be that the client is waiting for that response. Maybe it's just a REST API call for some custom client. that might cause some inconsistency in some way if I'm looking at to the response which is returned back as part of the update table. My understanding of the way of implementation was that we have a window for which this is valid. We have a way to say that, okay, this idempotency key is what the final status is. Some way we need to persist that. Along with that metadata, we can also persist the pointer that eventually got updated to return that back, because the client, if we return the latest table metadata rather than the metadata which it was trying to commit and what it would have seen, wouldn't that cause a different issue in some sense or the other? Or are we fine with it? Like, what would the client see if it sees the latest metadata of the table? If it's
So in the client, we actually we will. So in operations, what we'll do is we'll commit and then load the latest metadata and then like clean up files based on changes in the latest metadata. And that doesn't assume that when we refresh the table after a commit, that we get the exact version that we committed. So getting the exact version that you committed from the REST endpoint is actually a nice to have thing, because we can do one fewer load table request. So I don't think there would be any negative consequences of returning fresher metadata than is actually there. There's no guarantee that if you just committed a snapshot, the response has that snapshot as the latest one in whatever branch you changed.
makes sense.
And I think we want to lean into that because like we've had lots of discussions about deconflicting commits and other things that might alter like the metadata from what the client presented originally. So we should always assume that like when you get metadata back, you need to interpret that metadata, not assume it was what you actually sent.
That's true. It would be perfectly valid for it'd be perfectly valid without a failure to say, oh, I see I have a big merge, but I have a append commit on top of that merge. I'm just going to reorder or something. If you know that the semantics of the append commit allow that. I think that we have at Databricks an isolation level that allows us to do that.
Isn't it weird if we change one thing, let's say to update one like table location, and the other change happens to that table's like append data, that's probably fine. But if I update my location, but I get back another table metadata with different location because the other commits came in, and because of all these kind of delay things, then I get different locations.
So this is where it comes down to what did you assert for the table state. So if you make an assertion, we'll guarantee that your commit is applied in a way that assertion was true. So currently, we don't have assertions for like table location. We assume that location changes are not race conditions and that you're changing it seldomly. We don't make that same assumption for things like partition spec, schema, or ref snapshot changes. So you can make assertions about those. Anything that we want to make assertions about, we can actually add them. Although I don't think I would choose to have a situation in which the protocol allows asserting a certain table location or asserting a specific like property value, something like that. Some things are just what we consider idempotent, and like setting the location changes the location.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Cool. We are almost done here. And thanks for everyone for joining this meeting. I think this meeting has been recorded. Genesis is going to send out the record meeting lately. and see you next time.
Thanks.